Hello, and welcome to another Royal Automobile Club podcast, coming to you directly from Pall Mall in the heart of London. I'm your host, Damien Smith, and today we have some very special guests from the world of motorsport, all of whom share something specific in common. So what is it? A racing team? A car? A particular race or circuit? Well, not on this occasion. What our guests have in common today is a car livery, a colour scheme, a sponsor, a fuel supplier. That might seem unremarkable were it not for the specific livery we're talking about. They are surely the most famous colours in motor racing. They are, of course, the blue and orange of Gulf Oils, the colours that sponsored Ford GT40s in the 60s and those wondrous Porsche 917s in the 70s. And, of course, they had a little help from a certain film starring Steve McQueen. So let's meet our special guests today. First of all, we have Jackie Oliver, the man who raced for Lotus in Formula One, was the Arrows team owner in Formula One for over the course of 3 decades, and of course a John Wyer automotive driver who, with Jackie Ickx, won Le Mans in a Gulf GT40 in 1969. Welcome, Jackie. Good to see you here. We also have next to him, we have a fellow veteran of Formula One, another Wyer old boy as well, although albeit slightly more briefly than Jackie. He drove Gulf Mirages in the mid-70s, and he's a 5-time Grand Prix winner, John Watson. Welcome, John. We also have on the end here with us Graham Lorimer, experienced race team manager and the man in charge of the car that brought Gulf back to Le Mans in 1994 on the Kramer K8 Spider, in which Derek Bell would make what would turn out to be his penultimate start at the race that he won 5 times. Graham will be telling us all about the Kramer, which sits downstairs in the rotunda a little bit later on. Really interesting story about a car that's an important part of Gulf history in its own right as well. And then finally, and certainly not least, we have a very special guest who's come all the way across from America to be with us today. It's the Gulf Racing Fuels director, Marc Wesler. Marc, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. What a great atmosphere and what an opportunity we have to be here at the Royal Automobile Club.
It's quite a place, isn't it? It really is.
It's fantastic. And I've joked with multiple people earlier today that I wasn't so sure that they would let an American in, but here we are at some hallowed ground and here in the Seagrave Room. And just what a great opportunity.
Well, Marc, let's start with you. What is it about this brand? This Gulf didn't introduce commercial sponsorship to motorsport. It was there before, but in the mid-60s, it embraced it in a way we hadn't really seen before. And obviously it's lasted. What is it about this company and its relationship with motorsport?
That's a great question. Something about those colors, right? The orange and the duck egg blue that have just resonated motorsports across multiple generations, and it's still, as you mentioned on the intro, the most widely recognized livery in every paddock across motorsports. But ultimately, motorsports is in Gulf's DNA. It's in their bloodline. It's who we are as an organization. And Gulf Race Fuels here as a division of Gulf Oil International. We're just really excited to grow the rich tradition and history of Gulf's involvement in motorsports.
And obviously you're here to talk to us. We're going to be talking to Jackie and John and Graham about the past, but Gulf is very much in the future, and you're racing this year in 2020. Tell us why you're here and what you can tell us about what's coming ahead for Gulf.
Absolutely. The reason that we're here today is we're hosting a global launch event of Gulf's new race fuel division as a division of Gulf Oil International. And the opportunity has presented itself to get back into motorsports and to use motorsports as a great marketing platform, as Gulf has for a number of years. But to do that through a performance fuel segment and a segment of motorsports that allows itself to both promote motorsport, to promote Gulf, and hopefully a return on investment through the performance fuel segment.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but obviously there's a lot to cover on this subject of Gulf in motor racing. The two gentlemen in the middle had key roles to play during what's known as the golden era of motorsport. First of all, chaps, tell us a little bit about JW Automotive and the man who ran it, John Wyer, famously known as Death Ray, was his nickname. How did you both meet him, and how did you get on with him?
I met him the day I did a test for the Gulf Mirage team down at Goodwood in 1972. I was aware of the man, obviously, because of his background in motorsport and being a great team manager and the owner of the team that his product I was going to drive. And Death Ray was the nickname that was given to the boss. And it probably was inappropriate, but you were pre-warned and therefore on your toes. And his sort of first lieutenant was John Horseman. It was probably the person that I would have had direct contact with in running the car and, doing the test on the day at Goodwood to see whether they felt I was worthy or not of being a part of the team.
Mm. Jackie, you're not exactly the type of chap to be intimidated. How did you get on with Wire?
I always call him Darth Vader, actually. I think it's more familiar. The great thing about JW Automotive is that John Bayer was the head of it, but he had group people with John Horsman and David York, right? And they ran the team you're talking about the 60s, late 60s, so professional motorsport was only coming of age, and they were the hallmark of it. David York was a very good team manager, he used to manage the drivers very well. Horsman was a good engineer with a vehicle like the Ford GT40 and the 917, which needed engineering. And the strategy that JW indicated in long-distance races meant we produced a huge amount of success. So as a model of how a professional racing team should be run, they were an example in the 60s that everybody followed.
Yeah, I guess they were pretty much ahead of their time. And of course, the most famous victory, which you may have talked about once or twice before, Le Mans 69, and that incredible finish between your teammate Ix and Hans Hermann's Porsche, 120 metres or something like that between them at the flag. Now, Jackie Ix's decision at the start and his actions at the start, it could have cost you the race. Is that fair to say?
Well, it made a close finish, didn't it? Because we came round last on the first lap because he refused on grounds of safety. At the time, I said, do you need to do that, Jackie? And I think I'm glad that he did because the Echelon start was dangerous. Wolf trying to do the seatbelts up on the straight on the first lap, I think caused the accident. We were all doing it, so it was a thing that should be banned. But he was meant to walk across. And I think we qualified 7th, or 8th. The halfway across the track, the others were coming, so it turned into a funny ministry of walks until he get into the car. But it led to the closest finish ever because we lost 30 or 40 seconds at the start.
So your part in that, obviously, recently the GT40's come back into the limelight through the Le Mans movie that starring Matt Damon and Christian Bale. You know what it was actually like for real, and to drive down the Mulsanne at the speeds that you were doing without chicanes. Just tell us, give us a flavour of what it was like.
The interesting thing about motorsport in those days is that livery was not commercialised. And if you think of the orange and duck egg blue livery, or the John Player black cars, I don't think at the time Grady Davis of Gulf Oil realised exactly what it was establishing. And the livery became very successful, and still is, in classic car racing, because of the success that was in the Le Mans in 68 and in 69, and then in 70 and 71 with the 917 Porsches. So it was the success of a team like JW and the livery of the iconic orange and blue, it stand the test of time. I mean, it's I never thought about it until later on. The pictures you see of even cars that are not sponsored by Gulf, if you want to put a mark on a car, you paint it orange and blue. It's a very interesting story. But I mean, the thing was born out of the success that the team and the drivers in long distance racing achieved in those years.
Now, you more than played your part in that victory, particularly during the night, put in some big stints at night at Le Mans. But when it came to the finish, it was out of your hands. It was in Jackie's hands. What do you remember about those final minutes?
Jackie always wanted the start and finish. He was that teammate, not like Pedro. Pedro and I would share the driving duties. Jackie, I was the filler in between when he got tired and needed something to drink. But it was a good partnership. We won a lot of races together. I very much enjoyed my time with Pedro. He was an actually brilliant teammate. We were together at BRM and together in long distance racing with 917, and we won a lot of races. in a brilliant car. We should have won Le Mans in 71. The hose pipe came off the oil cooler, which had been in the front of the car, and filled the cockpit with hot oil when Pedro was driving. I can't imagine that wild serpent thrashing around, spraying hot oil on the inside of the windscreen in the middle of the night. But anyway, that finished our race, unfortunately.
And by the time you got in the 917, is it fair to say it was a much better sorted racing car than it was in its early days? Certainly in '69, when you were racing against it, it was quite a handful. But
I talked to Vic Elford about that because I had the horror stories of the 917 when it first came out, which had an aerodynamic imbalance, and they were pretty fearful to drive. But by the time I got my seat and that, the car was well sorted. I think John Horsman really sorted the car out, and it was well balanced. As someone said, is the Morsor kink flat, both in the GT40 and in the long-tailed 917. It wasn't a corner. It was easy. You couldn't have done that with the early ones. So, great job by the team in sorting the car out.
Yeah. Now, John, for those of you who are watching this podcast as well as listening to it, John's come dressed for the occasion. You're wearing a very suitable tie in the Gulf colours. Before we go any further, do you just tell us about the tie?
There was a reunion, I think 6-7 years ago, Gulf racing drivers, teams, at Silverstone, and everybody present was given a tie. And when I was asked to come here this afternoon, I dug it out, and I thought it would be appropriate to wear it, and sadly I'm the only one wearing it. Anyway, I'm very proud to wear it. It was an important part of my life.
Yes, shorter than Jackie's time at the team, but important to you. And it's a remarkable story, really, because you're Le Mans in 1973 with the team in the Mirage. It was your comeback race from a quite a significant injury, wasn't it?
Earlier in the year, I had an accident at Brands Hatch and had a double compound fracture of my right leg. So had a plate put into it and got back behind the wheel and went to Le Mans as my first race. The team were rightly concerned that maybe my stamina and ability to do a 24-hour race, roughly 12 hours per driver, may not be up to it. So they invited Vern Schuppen to take the third seat in the car. Well, so we were a 3-driver lineup, and the second car, Howden Ganley and Derek Bell, were just a 2-driver lineup. I don't know whether you might say, ironically, the third driver managed to go off track at Tertre Rouge and actually roll the car, and that was where the car finished its event. So that was somewhere in the early evening, late evening on the Saturday. So it was an early bath for Mike Halewood, myself, and I don't know if Vern came back to the pits or not, because I'm sure he would have realised that he didn't need to do that.
Yeah, I can't let you go without asking about Mike Halewood. Having the chance to race alongside him and with him, what was he like?
I think Mike was one of the nicest people, let alone a competitor or a teammate, that I met in motor racing, and I didn't really get to know him until a year earlier when we were doing Formula 2 and in different teams. And everything about Mike was just very relaxed and laid back. He took his racing seriously, but his demeanour wouldn't always indicate that. But the joy, if you wish, of being a teammate to Mike was there was no prima donna ship about him. How the car would be set up was fundamentally, let's make the car work for both of us. And that's something that is quite difficult in partnerships, particularly where you've got two strong-minded drivers, where they always want to be the driver who has the influence in the car setup. And I've raced with other drivers who have gone behind my back, and I've not found out a change has been carried out on a car until I got into it in the race. And that's unacceptable, I think.
Okay, so let's spool forward now 20 years to Graham's time with Gulf, and in its own way an equally remarkable campaign with a Kramer prototype Spider, K8 Spider, in 1994. Tell us about that. And is it right? It came together quite late as a program.
It did come together quite late. Kramer's approached me because they had a package together running Hondas in the event at Le Mans with John Thompson chassis, and Honda were adamant that they could have nothing to do with their Porsche side of things. They'd built and developed the K8 and they were pretty happy with it and thought it could get a job done very well. So they put a deal together with Gulf involvement and approached me, would I put a team together for it. It was about a 3 or 4 month project in total, so not a lot. And we put a team together. We did the test at Le Mans, the test weekend. Then we had problems with the floor. We went down to Most in Czechoslovakia and did some testing there, and then did the race. And Derek managed to put on second on the grid. I met up with him recently, and the first thing he said to me is, we could have been on pole. And it sort of came back that, hang on, we didn't do that race 2 years ago, Derek. It was 20 years ago. That's the nature of the guy.
Yeah, they don't never forget racing drivers, do they? That's for sure. So,
no,
but he was no spring chicken then. But he did a great job, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, superb. The experience comes through. The French people adored him. He's almost French, I think. The scrutineers, everyone there just thinks he's the greatest thing out. He's very well loved in Le Mans, there is no question.
Well, the car's downstairs, as I said at the beginning, and it looks fabulous. Just one thing I've always wondered about it was why that particular shade, because it's not the duck egg blue that we're familiar with Gulf. It's a sort of darker blue. What's the reason for that? Do you know?
I have no idea. We got given the car a week before their first test, I think, to go through it and familiarise ourselves with it. That's how it was presented. A Gulf choice, I would think. I don't know. I know no more than that.
And it's based on a Porsche 962, of course. So
it's very much a Porsche 962 without a roof.
Yeah.
It's got a flat floor. It hasn't got the big tunnels, which what caused us some problems that we had to go out testing with after the test day. But all in all, it's quite a lot like a 962 in many ways.
Mm. And yeah, you took a 6th place finish, which actually is pretty respectable by any stretch of the imagination. But could it have been better?
Yes, it could have been. Twice we were black flagged for tail lights going out. We had to remove the tail. That's the only reason I think the tail would have come off the car in the whole race, and that's a bit of a mission and a bit of a time loss to solve the problem with the lights.
Yeah. It's great to see you here and great to see the car. So thank you for joining us, Graham.
My pleasure entirely.
Mark, let's come back to you and talk about Gulf today. This incredible history. We just touched very briefly on it today in terms of the things that are associated with Gulf, the people who are associated with the cars. What would you say Gulf gets out of modern motorsport today? Why is it still involved?
I think Gulf gets an opportunity, right, to leverage an iconic past, a history, a tradition, and most importantly, revisit a bloodline. When you have something so deep inside you and it deeply roots you to a connection, there's no doubt that we want to use those building blocks and foundations and use motorsports as a marketing platform again. There's so many people who have a deep in their gut feeling and association. That Gulf brand makes them feel a certain way, and we want to take Gulf brand and diversify the future of the motorsport offering. It's so deeply rooted to circuit track and endurance racing, but to put it into go-karts, into motocross, into rally, into some drag racing stuff. There's so many opportunities for the brand moving forward through the performance fuel segment. I mean,
the future is a little uncertain, to say the least, for all of us in terms of general automotive and, of course, motor racing. I'd be interested to hear all your views on this, actually. But Mark, starting with you, where do you think the future lies for, especially for a company like Gulf, obviously that has a specialist in combustion engine fuels? Where do you think the future is for you and for the company and for motorsport in general?
Sure, there's no doubt that there's been some exterior pressure on different automotive segments, automotive manufacturers, to make a push towards being more green, towards electric vehicles. And we know that there's some opportunities out there for some of our lubricant lines in the electric vehicle world. But at the end of the day, motorsports in general and the people who are passionate about it, motorsports enthusiasts, are sensory-driven people. They want to be able to go to a race and feel it and smell it and hear it. And electrical series don't necessarily appeal to those senses, while we know all the benefits to it and that those engines are certainly capable of making a lot of torque and making for some good on-track racing. It doesn't actually appeal to the overall sensory of the event. And for those reasons, we believe that the internal combustion, particularly in a motorsports application, will always be relevant.
Okay, good. Jackie and John, Got to ask you your opinion on this. I mean, yesterday I was in Paris for a launch of a new electric touring car series. You know, these things are happening now. But the internal combustion engine, you talk to people in Formula One, they believe, as Mark said, there's still a future for the internal combustion engine. It's not over yet. What's your personal opinions on this subject?
If you're a large corporation employing a lot of people and they all turn up in battery-powered cars and fill out the car park, then the writing's on the wall. The thing is with modern technology is that fuels and oils are still going to take their place. But I don't think you're ever going to get rid of the internal combustion engine in classic car racing, because you're not going to get a classic electric car, right, be of any interest. Some of the biggest events now, I mean, you look at the Silverstone Classic, they're using an awful lot of petrol and they're using a lot of oil. I mean, you're talking 1,000 cars over a 3 or 4 day weekend, Goodwood. So participation in classic car racing is replacing spectators. And I think there's a huge market there. And if we've got an iconic brand like Gulf, then there is a market for it.
John, you're still involved in modern motor racing as a commentator. What's your take on where we are at the moment?
I believe that oil companies on a global basis are looking at and developing fuels, fossil-based fuels, might be different to the fuels that we use today, either gasoline or diesel fuel. And those fuels will become more and more environmentally friendly, as will internal combustion engines. So while in the UK we've been given a notification that by the 2030, one will no longer be able to buy a brand new internal combustion engine car. I just can't imagine what it would take if all of a sudden on the 1st of January 2030, there are no internal combustion engine cars being offered for sale. There are some 30 million currently on our roads. And how are you going to replace what's on the road? It is physically, I think, and in every sense, totally impractical. And also, you know, where are they going to get the materials for all the batteries that they're going to have to require to build to put into these electrical vehicles? There will be a transition at somewhere in the future, but I think that future can be balanced by oil companies working to produce fuels that are much more ecologically friendly.
Mark, go on.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Yeah. There's a number of components that are available today that may have not been available or commercially known that can help reduce emissions and can help make the performance fuel segment a more viable option than it's ever been. So yeah, there's a lot to what he is saying. Yeah,
it's good to know there's work being done at the moment. It's good to secure our future as a sport. Jackie, let's finish with you because you know, you look back to those times, late 60s and the early 70s. You could have no idea then what you were doing in terms of the effect it would have on people and the legacy that was being created then. You were just in the middle of it. But now you must be so proud to be associated with those teams and that time.
Well, you're creating history, aren't you? But you don't know it at the time. You're just pleased that you're in a winning car and enjoying and making a profession out of something you never thought you could earn a living with. So both John and I had a great career, and we look back at it, and there's certainly some things we might have done differently, but you look back on it and enjoy it. That's why we're here this afternoon.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, we could talk all day and into the evening, but sadly we're out of time. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining us today. Marc Wesler, Jackie Oliver, John Watson and Graham Lorimer, thank you very much. And thanks to you for listening to this very special edition of the Royal Automobile Club podcast. We'll be back soon with more special guests from the wide world of motorsport, but for now, it's goodbye from Pall Mall and see you next time.